Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to our most recent author event. Here at Hayes, we have been partnering with our friends Joy and Tricia at All Around Reading for a number of years, and we are delighted to offer you a series of really interactive author events dealing with a whole range of issues and subject areas, predominantly providing you with really good research around literature, particularly around representation, also providing you with a really comprehensive reading and resource list for you to follow up afterwards, but most importantly, being able to meet and share with you some amazing authors and being able to talk to them and put your questions to them. So we are absolutely delighted today to have Atinuka with us, who is going to be talking to Joy and Tricia in a little while, particularly about her new book on brilliant Black history in Britain. And any questions, if you wanted to make any comments or questions as we go through, do please feel free to put them in the chat and Tricia will pick those up. We will put a time aside at the end for us to put your questions to her. So for now, just please just enjoy the session and hopefully you'll find it really useful and enjoyable. So I'll hand over now to Tricia. Thank you.
Hi, actually Joy is doing this next bit. If you've been to one of our Hayes events before, you know that we like to start off by sharing a little bit of context and research around the issue to prompt the discussion. So to kick off, is it? It's not moving again, Vanessa. Oh no. I'll stop sharing and then start again, or do you want to share it from your end, do you think?
Yeah, just try and share again.
Try and share again,
yeah.
Okay. There, working. Apologies for that technology. It seems to go into a hiccup while we're waiting to let people in. So this is a quote by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, which I'm sure is familiar to a lot of you. It's often referred to, but I wanted to share it in full because I think when you see the full quote, it really does encapsulate why reading plays such an important role in striving for social justice and a better society, particularly this second paragraph, when it's talking about not just the windows and views of imagined worlds and the doors through which your imagination can take you, but that the window can be a mirror and that literature can reflect our human experience, and reading can then become a means of self-affirmation, and readers need to see their mirrors in books. And talking about reflecting realities, I wanted to sort of update you on the latest iteration, the 5th one of the CLPE Really Valuable Research, Reflecting Realities, which began in 2017. And what they're examining is the percentage of children's books that are published which feature Black, Asian or minority ethnic characters. And in 2017, I think everybody was appalled that it stood at 4%, and delighted, although it's still a work in progress, we're delighted by 2021 that that's gone up to 20%. But it isn't just about the numbers. If you read the reports in full, they really emphasize the point that it isn't greater volume alone. It doesn't just, just more books does not necessarily equate to better representation. It's the quality of the presence which really matters, that to ensure that the portrayals of racially minoritized characters do justice to their subject. So if you like, at the beginning, the survey was looking for any presence at all, but now it's beginning to talk about agency and about the main character. And again, we can welcome an increase. So the graph at the top, children's books featuring a main character from a racially minoritized background. when we've reached the levels of 9%, but 9% is still a low figure, as I'm sure you can agree. But we're moving towards meaningful presence. That's what we're looking for. If you look at this, you can see the picture is most progress has been made in picture books and non-fiction, less so in fiction. And it may be that there's a longer lead-in time needed because of the time taken to produce longer works and novels. But again, it's even in picture books, it's the quality of that presence, because you still see instances of things like indeterminate skin tones, so that you can't really identify what racial group the character might come from, to instances where the persons of colour are just in the background, and to stereotypical representations are still seen. So there are still a lot of issues. But this report also celebrated the fact that we are seeing more and more exceptionally well portrayed characters. And of course, our author today is renowned and very well known for the excellent characterization in her picture books and novels. So this is all really stating the obvious. Literature is the gateway to the world and experiences that we may never ourselves encounter. And also stories and verse is such a vital part of children's learning at school. And as the Missing Pages report says, our education system can unintentionally uphold systemic racism, and telling diverse stories at school is the very least we can do to help it. And particularly, the emphasis is on primary schools. These graphics come from the Lit in Colour research, which was a joint Runnymede Trust Penguin Random House project. They partnered with Pearson, Edexcel and Oxford University and published their report in 2020. So they highlighted things like the population of the school student population in England who are not white British is 34.4%, but fewer than 1% of candidates for GCSE English, for example, were able to answer a question on an author of colour. And 82% of the youth that responded to this survey couldn't recall ever having studied a text by a Black, Asian or minority ethnic author. 70% of the youth respondents agreed that diversity is an important part of British society and as such should be represented in the school curriculum. And the other factor we mustn't forget is the importance of fostering reading for pleasure, because we all know the links between that and overall attainment. And over 37% of the young people surveyed agreed that the books they studied at school had actually put them off reading. 41% of them hadn't read a single book for pleasure in the last 12 months. So we urgently need to find a way to re-engage young people with reading. And particularly when they're younger, particularly in the primary schools, because if we don't capture them as readers at that stage, they have so much less chance in the future. So these are the two reports I was referring to, the Lit in Colour and Missing Pages. Missing Pages was a publication from Teach First. Both these reports came out in 2020 as a response to the Black Lives Matter campaign. These were considered to be the greatest obstacles to teaching a diverse curriculum. Time and money are frequently mentioned, as you might expect. Schools can't always be said to bear the blame in terms of not spending money because their funding is dependent on the government in the first place. But the teachers are certainly time poor and overworked. And the thing is, the thing that these reports pointed out is that there are so many free resources, lesson plans and so on, which are all based on the sort of standard text, the canonical texts, and less, it takes more effort, it takes more research to try and find resources for diverse texts. But both Lit in Colour and Teach First are working hard to fill that gap, as are other organisations listed in the resource sheets that you will get from us. Our resources share lots and lots of useful websites and has some book suggestions as well. There's an awful lot out there, but that's where a school librarian could be useful because they can do the research for you. But we're trying to do our bit on behalf of teachers everywhere. And obviously teacher confidence is related to their confidence in the subject. Teachers often feel that they don't feel an expert in diverse literature. So, you know, they need all the help and suggestions they can get. And we've highlighted training materials and so on in the resources. But this quotation I was particularly interested in because it was from two primary teachers who said how difficult it was to find everyday narratives featuring characters of colour rather than ones which were focused on issues and struggle, or in terms of non-fiction were focusing on the exceptional people. They wanted everyday narratives, they wanted normalised. But today we're looking quite specifically at the history curriculum. Now, the Black curriculum is a social enterprise that aims to deliver Black British history all across the UK. They run virtual and in-person programmes to schools and young people to promote the importance of Black history. They've developed their own curriculum and have free and licensed resources for schools to help teach about Black history. And this report that you can see there was published in 2021, which examined the curriculum and highlights the drawbacks, specifically the fact that it omits Black history in favour of the dominant white Eurocentric curriculum, which completely fails to reflect our multi-ethnic society, and the need to reconceptualise what it means to be British has to incorporate all of our histories and all of our stories. And this report called for an evaluation so that it can contribute to greater social cohesion and acceptance. And that's what education should be doing. It should be promoting empathy and understanding and cohesion. I am particularly not fond, but I think this is a particularly apt cartoon. It comes from the Anti-Racist Educator website. Again, details are in the resource links. And it just absolutely encapsulates why we need to talk about this topic and what systemic racism in education means, because it shows white privilege at work and just how unfair it is. It's about all full potential. This website also has a white privilege test. There's a link in the resource, which I think would make an ideal opening activity for a training session. But if you've been to any of these sessions before, you'll be familiar with the sort of angle I like to take. I like to get back to basics, to where the buck stops, whose responsibility it is. And so pointing out national and international commitments. And in 1969, the UK ratified the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, CERD. And by ratifying that, they committed to eradicate racial hatred and incitement to hatred, to taking actions to combat prejudices which lead to racial discrimination, and guaranteeing the enjoyment of civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights without discrimination. And yet 40 years later, where are we? Certainly in terms of the curriculum, the reforms in 2014 to 16 didn't in fact help at all. Especially in history and English, where more traditional avenues were emphasised. In terms of CERD, the UK government, well, all signatories have to make regular reports to CERD about the progress within their country. These aren't particularly frequent, but in response in 2016, CERD recommended that the UK government does ensure that the school curricula contains a balanced account of history. And in fact, in the current response being prepared, there's in one of the responses from the University of Birmingham, they conducted a poll of British adults. This was published in 2020, concerning the teaching of racial injustice and Black history, and the proportion of all people in all ethnic groups who wanted more attention to these issues significantly outnumbered those who wanted less, which would certainly surprise the Daily Mail, I think. But at the time, what was the response from the government? Well, the Inspector of Schools and the Secretary of State for Education completely rejected this. But we have since had the publication of Inclusive Britain, which is the official government response to the Sewell report, which at the time, so the Sewell report was called for in response to Black Lives Matter, and at the time was highly controversial because it seemed to reject the whole notion of institutional racism. And in fact, this report, Inclusive Britain, has had some criticism and condemnation because it seemed to focus on individual action rather than structural change. But it does have Action 57 with regards to the history curriculum, and we're told there will be a model history curriculum by 2024 that will stand as an exemplar for a knowledge-rich, coherent approach to the teaching of history. So watch this space. Meanwhile, I'd just like to emphasise that the education unions are absolutely leading the field of this campaign. The NEU framework and charter is cross-curricular. It does not just for English and includes audit and training materials and loads of resources. And I highly recommend the Scottish websites too. You know, they are extremely well developed, and Scotland, again, a little bit ahead of the game. So a quick race through the background, but now let's hear it from a real Own Voices expert. And Tricia, over to you, I think, to introduce our guest today.
Thank you. It's absolutely my pleasure to welcome Atinuka to our event today. She was born in southwest Nigeria and moved to Lagos, where her reading habit started. That sounds wonderful. She was also wanted to be an author, but was told it was impossible. I'm so pleased you've proved them wrong. With an insatiable love of stories, what should follow boarding school in England was a degree in literature. Oxford University proved a dry well in which to exist. So Atinuka travelled, telling stories as she went. Now settled in Wales, she's proved everyone wrong by becoming a successful author. The Anna Hibiscus stories reflect Atinuka's love of her homeland and have created a wonderful series of books for children everywhere. Since the first Anna Hibiscus novel, many others have followed, plus lots of other stories in picture books and chapter books, all listed in the resource list. Africa, Amazing Africa followed as a first foray into information books. This year, she's publishing Brilliant Black British History, due in August. And I've seen an online version and it's fantastic. Go out and buy it. May I welcome you, Atinuka?
Thank you.
If we could start with you were told you couldn't be an author, and yet you obviously have overcome all of those issues and proved everybody wrong. What drove you other than a love of story?
Ooh, good question. Other than a love of story, I mean, I think a love of story was really enough for me. I struggled to find my voice initially. I knew I wanted to be an author from when I was 5. I did believe that it was going to be impossible. Certainly, I was told I wouldn't be able to have a certain standard of living if I was an author, and I think that's been true for many years. I was told that it was going to be impossible to get published, which didn't prove true for me. It wasn't until I wrote Anna Hibiscus that I found my voice. And I wrote Anna Hibiscus in response to children's questions. So I moved to the UK when I was 10, went to boarding school, and the children at boarding school used to say, what was it like growing up in a mud hut surrounded by wild animals? And then in my 20s, when I started oral storytelling, and I used to travel around schools and storytelling festivals, and children's questions were the same. They'd put their hands up and say, what was it like growing up in Africa? What's it like living in a mud hut? What's it like being surrounded by wild animals? And Anna Hibiscus was really my response to that, writing about a child growing up in an African megacity, the kind of lifestyle I had as a child, going to school in a car, going on holidays abroad in an airplane. There are children who grow up living in houses made of mud bricks on the African continent. And I'm not sure what the current figures are for people living in rural areas and living in cities, but I would think the bigger proportion of children don't have that lifestyle. And children tended to assume that it was growing up on the African continent must mean you had a poverty-stricken, negative lifestyle. The narrative about the African continent is predominantly negative. It's like corruption, poverty, war. And I wanted to write something different. And interestingly enough, that was how I found my voice. I started and stopped lots of novels. I'd written a lot of poetry. I'd done travel writing. But it wasn't until writing a book for children set in Nigeria that I found my voice.
Fascinating. Thank you. I think you've sort of explained what has inspired your writing. You're obviously trying to put the picture straight for a lot of children who had this image of Africa as being poor. And it was for reading for pleasure, but it's also for information. You put an awful lot of information about life in a megacity in Africa into your books. Was that a purposeful? Obviously it was purposeful. No, I'm using the wrong word. Joy, come to my rescue. Was that the only purpose, or did you just enjoy the writing of story as well? And I think you're going to say, yes, you did.
Yes, I mean, I love my job, which is lucky, because as I said, for a long time, my husband used to say, you'd have more money if you worked in Spa.
But that's no fun.
No, I love my job. I love writing. And I think that with each one of my series, so Anna Hibiscus, then the #1 Car Spotter, and then Too Small Toller, I had an agenda. So after Anna Hibiscus, I felt like, well, do I really think that you have to have a modern lifestyle and be literate to count, to be important? So, you know, the next series, the number one car spotter, he's illiterate. He doesn't go to school until quite a long way through the series. And he is as clever and adventurous and joyful and problem solving as any of the other illiterate people in my life and as a child. And then Too Small Toller is set, I suppose, in what we might call the slums, but certainly she doesn't have the privileged life that Anna Hibiscus does. She can't always go to school. If her grandmother can't earn enough money, then she has to work. So I had those agendas, but then I get carried away with my love of writing stories. It's a mix, really. It's like the agenda gives me the framework, and then I can play.
Yeah. And when you are writing, I mean, a lot of authors sort of say they haven't got an audience in mind. Do you have a very specific audience in mind? Or do you write because you want to write and that's a story you want to tell people?
I have audiences in mind. I think it started with writing for Western children who didn't know about that there was modern life outside of the West, you know, that you can live in any continent, Southeast Asian, African, and have a modern lifestyle that is completely comparable and almost interchangeable with modern life in the West. So I started writing for Western children, but very quickly I realized that actually who I'm writing for children on the African continent who don't see themselves in books. I didn't read a book with Black characters in it until I was 17. So I write for the children that I'm writing about.
Yeah.
So that they can see themselves in books. And I was once at a festival in Kenya where there was so many schools came that the audiences were like 700, 800 children. And one girl in one of my events put her hand up and said, "Thank you for showing the world that we're important too." And all the children just got to their feet and started clapping, like that was the thing for them, that my books showed the world that they are important too. And then I had a father at a library event in Luton say to me that he was from Somalia, and he said he never wanted to talk to his children about his childhood because he felt ashamed and he thought they would be ashamed of him. And then they found the number one car spotter books in the library, and they were saying to their dad, "Look how cool, the number one car spotter, he doesn't have to go to school, he herds goats, look at his life." And he said to them, "Yeah, that was my life, except it was camels, not goats." And he said he can talk to his children about his life now because through the number one car spotter, he realizes that his childhood was exciting. So I write for children of African heritage on the continent or in the diaspora, adults as well as children.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, reading with children can make such connections through families across the generations, not just father and child, but across many generations. Yeah. This might open a whole can of worms, and to some extent you've touched on it, but what experience did you have of education in the UK? And has that been the same for your children?
So me and my children, we've had a very varied experiences of education. in terms of the kind of schools. So I went to a independent girls boarding school initially, and then I went to a big co-ed comprehensive state school, where I did my GCSEs and my A-levels. And then my children went to a very small rural primary school in Wales, where the school is so small, there are only 2 classes. So the teachers, there's 2 teachers, and they teach, they teach different year groups together. And then my eldest son went on, when he left primary school, he went to a Waldorf school and had a Steiner education. And then my second son went to a state school in Wales that then went into special measures. And then he, after being beaten up at school, he decided that he was going to get himself a scholarship. So he got himself a scholarship and a bursary, and he is now at an independent school in England. Yeah. So I've had experiences with all sorts of different schools in the UK, state and independent and rural and city, big and small. And both me and my children experienced racism in all those schools, both from teachers and from students. It's always worse when it's from a teacher.
Yeah.
It's racism that is like a deliberate attack we've experienced in all those schools, and then the racism that just comes from ignorance.
Yeah.
None of the schools Black history has been taught.
No.
Or any kind of a sense that there is something to be proud of in being Black, or that this is a shared country, both in the education and in attitudes, the sense that this is a white country and people of color are here, tolerated, maybe welcomed at best and tolerated. Yeah.
And has this been sort of behind your move to go into non-fiction books so that you can sort of help put the record straight? Because I mean, there've been people of color in this country since time immemorial. I mean, it's a recognized fact. There were people of color on the Mary Rose. There were people of color in the Roman legions that came. There were, so and we're a nation of people who have come from all sorts of different roots. So I find the attitude to people of color really difficult to handle, because we're all people. But I did wonder if this is behind your move into non-fiction in a way that you're putting a very strong point of view about history and how people of colour have influenced our history, which we call it our history, but it's not. It's everybody's history. It's the history of the country. And then it seems as though I was reading quite recently, and things were saying that the people of colour were quite accepted in England for many, many years, until about James the fourth. Sorry, I get confused with my kings. They're not that important as far as I'm concerned. But somebody needs to put that record straight, and you have that background to do that. And I think the fact that you produced this wonderful book about Black British history puts it all straight. Would you like to comment on some of the things you found out that surprised you, or some of the things that you knew all along and you wanted to bring to the fore?
Well, to start with your first question,
Sorry, that was a real ramble, and I do apologise.
that's fine. I think I followed. I think I've grasped all the questions. When the Black Lives Matter marches were happening, and there was a call to decolonize the education, I wanted to send a list of books about Black British history to the schools that I work with, schools that I've done events at, or even schools where I've said, I'm sorry, I can't come, I can't come.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find a single, not one single book for primary school children about Black British history. Maybe about Black world history, maybe about Black American history, but there was nothing specifically on Black British history. And I had sat down at my desk thinking that there was going to be a whole range of books, and I was going to order them, and I was going to look at them, and I was going to pick the best ones, and I couldn't even find one, not even a rubbish one. And so I thought, well, I'm going to have to write one.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to get a commission from Bloomsbury to write it. Because, yeah, I can't afford to take, as it turns out, it was 3 years off to just write something without an advance. And the book I've written is very different to what I thought I was going to write, because I thought that, okay, there will be maybe, yeah, I thought, I'm sure I know there were some Black Romans. And then I found out that there was a Black Roman emperor called Septimus Severus, an actual emperor, and that he actually ruled the Roman Empire from the city of York for 3 years. And I just kept making discovery after discovery like that, and realizing how Black people have been left out of British history. I mean, I hesitate to say purposefully, but it's kind of hard to see how Black people's contribution to Britain could have been overlooked by mistake. I mean, it was a Black man called Lewis Latimer who oversaw making the electricity in London. So when London became electrified and got public electricity for the first time, like streetlights, and it was a Black man who organized that. It was a Black man who invented a way of storing plasma so that in World War II, blood transfusions became possible. And he oversaw the transferring of plasma to Britain. I mean, it goes on, and I just kept making discovery after discovery, and I'd like to share one of the first spreads of the book with you, because this was my biggest discovery, and I really couldn't believe this.
I think Joy has this and can share it.
You should be able to see it now.
Lovely, yeah.
Great. So this is an illustration of what the very first British people looked like. So humans, including Neanderthals, who were a sort of human, came and went from what we now call Britain until the ice ages ended. And when the ice ages ended about 12,000 years ago, modern humans settled in Britain, and there have been humans in Britain ever since. And those modern humans, Homo sapiens, who settled in Britain 12,000 years ago, looked like this. Their skin marker in their DNA is the darkest and the second darkest possible skin markers that humans can get. So they were darker than me. And they lived in Britain for 7,500 years. So for 7,500 years, this was the face of Britain. This is what British people looked like. And then about 4,500 years ago, the first significantly lighter people moved to Britain. So, I mean, I couldn't believe that I hadn't known this. This research, I mean, this was discovered in 2019 when the Natural History Museum did DNA tests. They had the technology and the funding to do DNA tests on the skeletons of the earliest modern Britain. They were not surprised because all Western Europeans were black at that time. And so for me, this overturned all the racism that I have faced since moving to Britain when I was 10, of being made to feel that I didn't belong, that it wasn't my country. When was I going back to where I came from? And comments like that based on my skin color. And to realize that actually Britain was black for almost twice as long as it has been white is a big deal for me. To realize that this, you know, this country just belongs to humans of all color, and we all have an equal right to be here. The fact that Black people got here first shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter. But having lived through a lot of racism, it does. I feel like we got here first, actually. And it's a great thing for my kids. And I hope that it'll be something. I'm really hoping that this spread in particular could help shift children's attitudes, because children grow up to be adults, and hopefully children who've had this book, white children may be less likely to say, why don't you go back to where you came from, or feel like Britain's a white country, and you know, and that Black children who read this book can feel like, yeah, this is my country too. I have a right to be here. I don't have to just be tolerated. So I learned a lot. Yeah, I learned a lot. I mean, people of my skin color, so lighter than the first Britons, but still dark, built Stonehenge. So the people who built Stonehenge looked like me. And that's a massive thing for me as well. Really, really.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable, isn't it? I mean, I know it's relatively recent in terms of scientific discovery. As you say, it was 2019. But where was that in the media? Where was that news promoted? It's almost like they've kept it a secret even now. So I think books like this are absolutely vital, and the more they can be shared widely, the better for the sake of every child, not just children of colour. Every child needs to know the story. So this might be an appropriate time to point out that Bloomsbury have very excitingly offered an incentive. We've said that Black British History is being published in August. 31st of August is publication date. But it is available to pre-order now from a variety of different sources, and anyone from this session who wishes to pre-order, you'll find the details in the resources, but anyone who wishes to pre-order can send proof of their purchase to a Bloomsbury contact that will be there, and you'll be put into a draw where your school could have the amazing opportunity of a personal Zoom visit from Atinuke, which would be just fabulous. Should I stop sharing now?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Which, as I said, is a marvellous opportunity. So I hope you will all take advantage of that.
No, fantastic.
Did you want to tell us a little bit more about the sort of narrative arc of the book? Because I think that, to me, was what struck her, that your storytelling ability and your storytelling talent really comes through in non-fiction as much as it does in your novels and picture books. It's extremely readable. I think Tricia would agree.
Absolutely.
Fabulous. Just engrossing.
Thank you. Thank you. I do have to work hard at that, actually. And it's, yeah, I won't go into the long, painful process of doing that. But the book itself, so what I wanted to write and what I hope I've succeeded in writing is a chronological British history. So it's a book about British history, but it doesn't leave out the Black people. And it does focus on Black people. But I wanted a book where, you know, we start, I did do a little bit about evolution at the beginning, and then we start with the first Britons, and then there's the Celts and the Romans, then the Middle Ages and the Tudors, and it goes along like that right up to the Black Lives Matter marches. So it's a whole history, condensed, but chronological, on British history with Black people left in.
I think chronological history is so important when you're engaging children, because that storytelling element engages them within the history. I mean, certainly when I was at school many centuries ago, we had lots of chronological history books, and I used to love them. I'm afraid they didn't tell me anything about Black history.
So why do you think it's important that we change the curriculum, that we incorporate Black history? I mean, we've touched upon this, and we've touched upon your views on education, but why do you think it's so important at this time that we do it?
Well, like I said, I think we can, by changing it, we can avoid children growing up into adults with racist attitudes, aggressively racist attitudes, or adults who, you know, myself included, like, you know, my knowledge on Asian history and Southeast Asian history could be better. Adults who don't know about the history of other British people. I didn't know about my own history, didn't know about Black history. I don't know enough about Asian history. And to give children a feeling of belonging and self-confidence and self-esteem. But also just understanding why we're here You know, there's that wonderful quote, we are here, us people of colour in Britain, because you were there, because Britain went to our countries first. We're talking about modern Black people now, as opposed to the first Britons, the ancient Black British people, modern Black British people. We're here because Britain went to our countries, and not only did Britain go to our countries, but Britain impoverished our countries, and also set into play things that have resulted in civil war and as well as poverty. So set up circumstances that mean that people flee from their countries, and they flee from their countries to go to safer, richer countries, including Britain. And that, yeah, Britain has a big role to play in that, in terms of, you know, in terms of Caribbean people as we know them, Afro-Caribbean people, Asian Caribbean people, Southeast Asian Caribbean people would not exist without Britain and other European countries. Those people's ancestors were forcibly taken by force or by trickery to the Caribbean islands. So if you don't know that history, then your understanding of Britain today is very meager.
But there's also the issue I've heard discussed about Black history being so much more than the history of slavery.
Absolutely.
The story of slavery. The story of slavery and colonialism is, as you say, crucial to understanding our present society and a lot of the ills that we're involved with. But I think it's a bit like, though, the quote that I used in the presentation about wanting to find novels that celebrate the normal, the everyday, in the same way you don't want the Black history to just be a negative picture of enslavement. You want the bright and beautiful and the things to make
the creativity of Black people from all over the world. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And as you say, all of the scientific discoveries and technological changes, and you know, there's so much positive that needs to be emphasized in the curriculum as well. There needs to be a balance. Would you agree?
It does. Yeah, there needs to be a balance. And I go back and forth on it. Sometimes I think, should I have given more spreads in my book to this and less to that? It's hard to find a balance. There's no right balance. There needs to be a mixture. I think without really understanding how the transatlantic slave trade worked, we don't understand how Britain came to be a superpower. And how Britain, this tiny island, became so rich and so powerful. And so it's important not to leave that out. At the same time, now I feel like it's super important to understand who built Stonehenge, you know, this great icon of Britain, and who the first Britons were, and how, you know, Black inventors and artists and scientists contributed to British history and culture and society, both Black British people and also Black people from around the world. The man who installed electricity in London, who I've talked about, he was an African American. Well, his ancestors had been taken to America by British people. And then in turn, his brilliance has affected Britain. And there are many, many stories like that.
There's a question come up in the chat, if I might ask it at this stage. Sophie Beaumont says, how would you recommend reading your new book to a class? Would you read the whole book or read it in parts?
I think there's so much to talk about. And I guess ideally for me, I would read it in parts. I would take a spread at a time, and I would use it as a part of teaching that bit of history. So, for example, to have a focus on Tudors and learn about Tudor England and Stuart Scotland and, what was happening over the UK in Tudor times, and then use my spread to talk about Black British people in Tudor times. But I think it can also be read from beginning to end as a story. That's how I intended it, and I've read it aloud enough times now that I have to pay my children if I need someone to listen to me read it aloud, so I can hear it. I can hear it in a different way when someone's listening to me read it aloud, and they've heard it too many times now. But it can be read aloud from beginning to end in less than a day.
Yeah, arising from that comment, what has been your children's reaction to the story?
Yeah, amazed, and because I'm their mum and they see me working in my pajamas, they have fact-checked everything. Like, they don't believe it. It can't, just because mum says it, especially because mum says it, it's probably not true. So they have been like, they have checked and double-checked everything, because they're just like, Mum, it can't be true. The first Britons can't have been Black. Yeah, it's been fun, and they've been with me. We've had to do some like mad dashes to museums, and like I said, it's when we were chatting before this, 3 fact checkers have worked on this book, and the final one who checked every single word. And there were things then that I just couldn't remember, because it's been a 3-year process, and I just felt like, but I just know that. I know it. I know it's true. But I had to find the proof, and we dashed off and went to the British Library and actually saw the voting slip of Ignatius Sancho, who was the first Black man to vote in Britain. And he voted at a time when women were not allowed to vote, and only about 3% of men were allowed to vote. You could only vote if you were a property owner. And yeah, the first Black man on record to vote, and we saw his voting slip, and we saw a green bus in Bristol that was used at the time of the Bristol bus boycotts. So yeah, they had fun also helping me find my proofs. Yeah,
I think that's something that schools will certainly, the lucky school who wins an author visit from you, the Zoom author visit, I think schools will be fascinated to hear about that 3-year writing process and what is involved, because it's so very different from the writing of fiction, the writing of a novel. You said you were amazed, I think, by the number of people that got involved from a publishing point of view.
Absolutely. I mean, I started off thinking it was going to be a certain sort of book, and then you know, I thought maybe we'd be starting in the Roman times, and then realizing we were going to have to start like 12,000 years ago. And I discovered that like partway through the writing process. So I kept discovering things and then discovering, oh, actually Stonehenge was built by Black people too. And so the book evolved and changed a lot through those years. And a lot of people had to come on board. Yeah. I hope I didn't burn out too many people.
But it will be worth it. It is worth it.
Yes.
The end certainly justifies the means.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. A sort of very practical question. Do you have hints and tips for teachers and school leaders about what they can do to ensure all children are represented and included?
I guess it depends on the sort of school. So I think if I was a teacher at a diverse school, I would want, in an ideal world where exhaustion and burnout didn't exist, I would want to learn about the history, the heritages of the children in my class, just so that I could drop in little things, you know, like the numerals 0 to 9, those are Hindu numerals. It was Hindu people who I don't know whether you discover maths, who created
yes.
yeah, those numerals that we all use
Yeah,
now. And it was Muslim Arabic people who brought them to the knowledge of the West. And it was Muslim mathematicians who came up with algebra. And I think dropping those things in as you go to give children a sense of pride in their heritage. And then I guess it's equally important if you're teaching in a school that is all white or predominantly white, because the assumption is, because of the society that we live in, the assumption is that white people did it all. They made the discoveries, they made the science. And, you know, so to say, well, the first novel was written by a Japanese woman, and to say, yes, there was a Roman Syrian empress, you know, who ruled the Roman Empire, and she came to Britain for 3 years as well. Just so, yeah, just to give a sense. I mean, there was a scientist from East Africa who was working in the Middle East, who discovered evolution 1,000 years before Darwin. And there's speculation, like, did Darwin discover it himself, rediscover it, or some scholars say, no, he must have had this other scientist's books, or at least heard of them. And just to sort of say that in schools, to give a sense that world knowledge and history is rich, and that every people have made, every people from every heritage and every country and every part of the world has made incredible and important contributions. Like, we did this together. Yeah, I guess that those are my hints and tips, and a lot of them are in children's books. I don't think that teachers have to do too much reading of heavy, undecipherable tomes. because hopefully there's been enough people like me who's done that and written it up, hopefully in a really fun way. Like, you know, there's Amazing Muslims book, which is just wonderful. There's so much in children's books now. I think that teachers can just look at those and get them. It's a Black History book by Doreen Kindersley. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. That's world Black history. So there's a lot of African history in that book as well. They've done one on migrations, on world migrations. There's books now, children's books on Southeast Asian history and cultures, and I think the information can be accessed in a really fun, quick, easy, accessible way, and passed on to children like that.
I mean, that is one of the bonuses of modern times, isn't it? Is the technology to open up different, multimodal ways of accessing the information. I mean, I can't wait to go back to Stonehenge and hopefully see some changes in their museum displays in terms of the images portrayed, for example. I wonder if Bloomsbury has any plans to develop any resources around the book. Do you know?
Not that I know of yet.
So there's an opportunity for keen and excited teachers out there who want to develop some resources to go alongside your book. I'm sure Bloomsbury would be very pleased to hear about those.
Yeah.
One thing that occurred to me while you were talking about reading aloud and reading your latest non-fiction aloud, and I think it is certainly one of the growing perceptions that you don't just have to read stories, that children will be completely engrossed by all it's the reading aloud and sharing the books, which is the key thing. And you were talking about reading your own book and reading your book to your children. I wondered if that was linked to your love of traditional storytelling, needing to hear how the words sound. Is that why you need to read it to your to know?
I think it started just as a way of me being able to see the texts fresh. When I've read them on the page too many times, and then now it's become a habit, because certainly the fiction that I write, I want it to work to be able to be read aloud to children, and it is a way that really helps me keep that storytelling voice for my non-fiction, is by reading it aloud and making sure that it can be read aloud, that it sounds like a story. But there's such huge challenges in telling something like a story, keeping the word count really short, because I think it would have been easy to the word count to have been 10 times as long, and keep it factual, because when you condense a really complicated thing into something simplified, the danger there is that you lose the fact, you lose the truth. So for example, one of my sons is doing A-level physics, and he says, yeah, this is what they taught us today, but it's actually not true. When I do physics at university, I'm going to learn that none of that was true. It's just that that's the easiest way of teaching it. So it's an issue that I had with the book. So, for example, there was a ruling done by Lord Chief Justice Mansfield, which I write about in the book. And his exact ruling has been lost because there was a fire that burnt the court papers. So all we have is what the newspapers reported, and the newspapers' reports are contradictory. And basically he said that as far as historians seem to agree, and again, in writing my book, what do I choose when historians disagree? Historians mostly agree that Lord Chief Justice Mansfield said that there's no precedent in British law for slavery. And so an enslaved person in Britain can't be taken out of the country and sold. And people translated that into meaning that slavery was illegal in Britain. But I had one sentence in my book to say that, all that I've explained to you. There was no more room than one sentence. So in the end, I put Lord Chief Justice Mansfield got as close as he could to making slavery illegal in Britain. And I just hoped that that would cover all of that story that I've told you of burnt court records and contradictory newspaper reports and historians arguing and telling each other that they're wrong, etc., etc.
Yeah, I mean, that is a huge skill, being able to do that. And I think because one of the things I've always so much admired your books for is because there is a real dearth of quality fiction for that early, just emerging, just becoming confident reader. And with your Anna Hibiscus stories and the Car Spotter and so on, and Tola in particular, you have really perfected the art of telling hugely engaging stories with not many words. So it is genius, I think, absolutely brilliant. And I think it's particularly, that we're desperate to be able to have books like that to promote just generally for that sort of reader. And I just think it's marvelous that the ones that we're promoting are also ones which are beautifully diverse texts, which enhance the children's lives immeasurably. So yeah, it's a double win as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. It probably comes from all the years of telling oral traditional African folk tales, where using very simple language to get across quite complicated and deep issues, because certainly in Yoruba culture, my father's Yoruba, stories are used as a teaching method. So yes, they're entertaining and they're fun, but they're a way of getting across to children and young people basically the consequences of your actions. So if Tortoise does this, what's going to happen to Tortoise? If Monkey chooses that, what is going to happen to Monkey? If the hunter does this, what is going to happen? And I think just doing that over and over again and telling the same stories over and over again did something to my brain.
Yeah, amazing, lovely. I'm just looking, and we don't seem to have
there's a couple of comments I've got direct to me, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Michelle has said, if it seems to me that in order to be properly inclusive, there needs to be a huge educational piece of work for the people working in our schools in order to understand and be able to share this knowledge with pupils. I absolutely agree. I think that that goes without saying. And then she poses the question, what's the role of teacher training institutions ensuring this is part of teacher training? And certainly I would think, and I would imagine you would agree, they do have a very big role. And I'm not quite sure how they will grasp it.
Hopefully it will happen.
Anybody from teacher training want to make a comment on that? Or
I did Teach First last year, and there's a huge focus on diversity in the curriculum. It was actually, I mean, it's sad that I was impressed by it, but it was a real focus in the curriculum. We had multiple sessions on it, and there was always that kind of, even just kind of going like diversity for like neurodiversity and things like that. It was just such an inclusive environment. So like I've just qualified as an NQT, and from my experience, it's always on the forefront of my mind, diversity.
fantastic.
So I had a really positive experience with that. It's something that I really try to include in my practice all the time, because I'm aware that I don't represent everybody in my country. So it's I work in a very white school. So it's trying to make everyone feel seen. Particularly in my class at the moment, I've got a Muslim boy, and he tells me that he feels different, but we have so many positive conversations about how being different isn't bad and it's unique and you celebrate it. And he's celebrating Ramadan, and we put decorations up as a class, and to make him feel like he belongs. He's not different, he belongs in here as much as everybody else. And when we talk about things and we read books that are representative, you see it, and you get kids just going, and you're like, yes, it is. And like even with just like film and like Black Panther, that's been a huge thing for kids to feel recognized, and they call it theirs, that's my superhero, and you're like, yes, that is your superhero, that's you. So as like a new recognize that it's an environment where these things are changing from how it still is, but how it particularly was, and being a part of that is something that's really, really important to me as like an ECT.
Thank you, Sophie. That's really encouraging. I'm feeling very positive about that. That's good to hear. Thank you.
Atanuka, have you ever been asked to speak at a further education, higher education, teacher training institute, anything like that?
No, I haven't. I'm really, really happy to hear from Sophie what's happening, because I was interested when in the research that you talked about at the beginning, just talking about teacher confidence, and I thought, yeah, we're expecting a lot of our teachers, and certainly, there's a fear as well of getting things wrong, using the wrong vocabulary or saying the wrong thing, and it must be so nerve-wracking to want to change the narrative and not to have training or education in that, and not wanting to offend people by saying the wrong thing when you're trying to do the right thing. It can't all be on the teachers to suddenly have to invent a new curriculum themselves.
Yes, it has to come from the top down to some extent. It has to be, because I think the atmosphere in schools and education is so governed by I was going to say teaching to the test, but I don't really mean that. What I mean is the government restrictions on what you can and can't do, and what Ofsted is looking for and not looking for, makes schools so nervous that they need to be sort of officially released to say this is okay, this is part of the, so I have great hopes that that this model history curriculum that they bring out will be all that it says, and hope that something similar will happen in English and decolonising the English curriculum, particularly at secondary.
There is the English Association are part of an organisation in partnership with other educational institutions about decolonising the curriculum for English, and they have found it being interesting. Let's put it that way. I was part of English Association at one point, and that was a fascinating discussion that was having. Yeah.
There's a question just popped up from Krista Greenwood. We're working hard in our mostly white school to be an anti-racist school and to be as diverse as possible. Any recommendations for literature that can support staff to feel more confident in getting it right? We have 2 very diverse libraries and teachers very keen to expand the range of texts we share at school. Do you have any personal recommendations, Atinuke?
The books that I mentioned about, especially the DK Black History book, and Amazing Muslims. The author, I can't remember her first name, but her surname is Islam. But I think, you know, the organizations that you were mentioning, especially the Black curriculum, they have so many resources now that they're developing all the time, aren't they?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, hopefully our resource list will highlight a few more things for people to look at and check out.
Yeah,
and
I wanted my book, of course.
Yes, absolutely. Your book, yeah. And
at the top of the list.
And can I put a plug in for your wonderful book on Africa as well, which, you know, was an absolute eye-opener in terms of history. And again, another absolutely beautiful book, beautiful production. I wonder if we've got time just to squeeze in, you know, the traditional question, what are you working on now? What can we look forward to in the future?
Or are you having a rest after that 3 years of effort?
I am actually having a rest. My youngest child calls the brilliant Black British History book the book that nearly killed my mother, with hyphens in between each word. So I am having a rest, but they're going to be more Tola books. I'm just waiting for a synopsis to be approved for the next one. There's going to be more picture books. There's a book called L is for Love, which is set in Lagos, which will be coming out next year. There's a book coming out next year, which is going to be my second book not set on the African continent. It's set in Wales. It's about a little girl who lives in a roundhouse in the woods with no technology, as I did in Wales. I feel quite proud that I grew up in a mansion in a megacity in Nigeria, and then I moved to Wales, and that's where I got to live in a mud hut. So it's about that. It's about that lifestyle, very much about nature, British nature, and yeah, that's going to be really rather lovely. It's illustrated by Emily Hughes, and it's just, yeah, it's just going to be absolutely gorgeous. I'm looking to the side because I've got the roughs piled up next to me, but they are, I don't think I can share them. They're very rough. I don't think Emily'd be happy if I shared them.
So is that one of the pleasures of authorship in you know, working with different illustrators and seeing the images that they get from your words?
Yes, it is, and more I enjoy working as a team, and I don't know, I think people are often surprised. And sometimes I think, is it really going to be only my name and the illustrator's name on this book? Because so much of it is a team effort, and certainly with the picture books that I do with Angela Brooks-Frank, we work more and more as a team, and COVID helped us because we realized that we could work over Zoom. So we meet, the editor, the designer, Angela and I, we like to meet as often as we can on a Friday, and we talk about everything from the page turns, how the child will feel on this spread, and then how they will feel when they turn the page, what emotional impact that will have on the child. Colors, I mean, everything is discussed, and with brilliant Black British history, I told you again before we started, like 5 editors, 3 fact checkers, 3 designers, and it's wonderful working as collaboratively. I really enjoy that. Yeah.
And that's a fabulous message for schools and children to hear, I think, you know, this collaborative, creative process. I can't believe how quickly this time has gone, Michelle.
Just flown.
I know we've got 2 minutes to play with. If anybody's got any last minute questions that they want to stick into the chat. I'm really interested actually to see if we can get some feedback in a year's time after schools have had chance to use your book and to, you know, upskill themselves, as well as sharing that knowledge with pupils, and how that's worked. I think there is a bit of a gap within some teaching, well, not just teaching staff, but within the staff in schools as well. So that was my question about making sure that teachers feel confident to be able to share that information, potentially with challenge from some students, which, you know, all schools have, you know, students that challenge knowledge, don't they, and ask questions. So I think there's a real piece around upskilling staff, isn't there, and being able to confidently deliver all of that material, and some of the worksheets. And it'll be interesting to see the resources that are developed around supporting that learning. There's huge opportunity, isn't there, for lots of creativity in taking away some of the information in your book and creating. I can just imagine some of the work that the kids are going to do. So I think it's a really, really important book, and it's just brilliant that you've written it and that it's going to be available for people to, you know, support in their delivery of that part of the curriculum, which isn't covered, is it, in great depth. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see in a year or two's time, you know, the impact that it's had. It will be interesting to see how that pans out, I think. Don't know if you agree, Joy.
Yes, it would be fabulous. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I'd love that this session might possibly inspire a teacher to start creating some resources to go with the book. That would be lovely. Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to looking at the artwork as well, because that's such an important part, isn't it? The visual sort of storytelling as well. So yeah, I can't wait to see it. So bring on August. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Can't wait. Not looking my life away, obviously, but looking forward to reading it. So yeah, I think we're up to about time now, aren't we?
Yeah.
So
don't forget the publisher incentive for pre-ordering, because you know, to have the opportunity for your students to meet Atenuka would be just fabulous.
Exactly. There are some brilliant recordings, aren't there? Am I allowed to say this on YouTube?
I think so.
Where people can watch you sort of reading stories from some of your Anna Hibiscus books, which are brilliant and really engaging. So would encourage people to have a look at those. But yeah, definitely try to pre-order the book if you can. Yeah, and a great opportunity to win an author visit virtually. But yeah, I think that's about it. So just from my perspective, we will get the resource list. It's a really comprehensive resource list that Trisha and Joy have put together, which we'll be sending out. We'll send a recording of the session. Yeah, and any other thoughts and feedback, feel free to get in touch and to yeah, let us know what your thoughts are. But thank you ever so much for joining us, and thanks to Joy and Trisha for all their hard work putting all the information and resources together, and most importantly to Atenuka for writing the book and for agreeing to come on this evening when she's really, really busy, but to kind of
share her experience of it. It's been really, really brilliant. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.